Damien Riehl, how are you?
I couldn't be better. How are you, Horace? It'd be really good to see you.
Really good to see you as well. And I'm doing well. Welcome back, listeners, to Season 2, Episode 1, where we're going to be talking about big things. And in particular, it's big tech and big law today. So, Damien, we did not rehearse and practice this episode, but I'll be springing surprises on you all the way through.
That's even better. I was thinking whenever we have spontaneous meetings in the conferences, those are the best discussions. So I really like this extemporaneous discussion that we're going to have in front of our dozens or hundreds of listeners, maybe thousands of listeners at this point. Who knows?
Millions,
Definitely
because it's big. Season 2's all big, Damien.
That's right. Big law, big tech, and big audiences.
Well, the inspiration for this story is, you might have seen last week, Freshfields has come out and said they've partnered with Google to look after all of the internal generative AI needs. And to me, that's a pretty significant piece of news because Google has stayed out of this legal vertical until I think now. And then 2 days after Freshfields came out, Google came out again with KPMG and said KPMG Legal is now using Google for something. So it looks like the giants are making moves in legal.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because I've thought a lot about, and I think maybe we've talked about here, the idea that AI is kind of like a tsunami that all of us can run in front of for a while, but eventually it's just going to crash over all of us. Certainly a tsunami as far as we individually, that is Horace and Damien, can run in front, but then also we as organizations also can run for a little while. So we as law firms can run for a little while. We as legal tech companies can run for a little while, but eventually the AI tsunami will eat all of us. At the risk of being a little bit too academic, you can think about Marx and the means of production. The means of production historically has been humans. As the means of production goes from human capital to AI capital, the AI can maybe do a lot of the work that maybe humans could have done in the past. Maybe that AI capital will never replace humans and we'll just have more human work than ever. But let's assume the apocalyptic scenario. Scenario 1 is that we have more work than ever. Scenario 2 is that we'll just fire a bunch of people. And that apocalyptic vision might say, okay, do we really need legal tech company X when we have Google that could be able to have 2 million token context window today, maybe 4 or 10 million tomorrow with Meta if you see their 10 million, as the context windows get much larger and as more of the corpus of data for any particular legal tech company gets ingested into Google and Microsoft, et cetera. How long before that tsunami just crashes over the legal tech company and just eats their lunch? And so that Freshfields plus Google is maybe a tip of the spear, if you will, on that being able to say, hey, what can Google do that maybe I don't need a point solution for? But what do you think?
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? If we take your idea to the extreme, you're essentially saying one day very soon, Google's going to be able to send you a workforce of AI bots. Let's call them bots for convenience. And these will be able to perform the job of the lawyers today. It's a very interesting sort of like extreme view of where the technology can get to. I don't see a path, like a direct and narrow path to that outcome yet, because that entails, I think, technology getting much, much smarter and also much more capable at collecting data. We've always had this issue where at the point of collecting data, the devices just aren't doing a great job. Like there was this movement for Internet of Things about 10 years ago where, you know, everyone's supposed to have like this health devices and little rings and so on. And and Damien, you're wearing one right now. Google thanks you. And we were supposed to like have all of this data collected, which would then feed into something, which then feeds us back information and insights. I think for these future legal bots to do a good job, it would need to collect a lot of data, both on what the law is and then on the softer human side of, well, is the client actually concerned about that? Can I hear it in the tone of their voice? Can I see it in their eyes? Am I resonating? Like, I think it's not quite there yet. And that's even assuming. That's even assuming large language models get to the point of being able to reason, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't see a straight and narrow path, but I do see there is a possibility of that coming true. And I guess the question is, should we be preparing for that possibility?
Yeah, I know you, Horace, have used Google's deep research and OpenAI's deep research. And there's a new Manus, MANUS, that also does a really good job. You can call it agentic or you can call it whatever you want. But if you ask Manus to be able to think through all the considerations for drafting a merger agreement in this area between a Chinese company and a US company and saying, give me all the laws from China and all the laws in the US that might apply to this merger agreement, including antitrust, and will it pass EU scrutiny for the antitrust laws there? It will search through the corpus of the web and be able to pull in things that will then be used to be able to draft provisions of the contract to maybe comply with those. So the real question is, number one, is there a corpus of contracts that the large language models can use for RAG or for other training purposes? Number two, does it have cases, statutes, and regulations? And number three, for those cases, statutes, and regulations, does it have the fact that Roe v. Wade is no longer good law? Because that matters. You need to know that Roe v. Wade is bad law to be able to draft a good motion or to be able to draft a good merger agreement that takes into account the most recent laws, not the old laws. So the real question is, how long is it going to be before there's a sufficient corpus of the legal documents, the complaints, the answers, the motions, briefs, pleadings, and sufficient corpus of the cases, statutes, and regulations? And then number three, is it good law or is it not good law? And then number four is the stuff that's locked in lawyers' brains. In the closed-door meetings that I've had, whether it's transactional or litigation work, in those closed-door meetings, what pushes the needle from this side to that side? What gets from doing a deal to blowing up a deal? What gets a judge to say yes rather than no? These are all things that are stuck in lawyers' brains. And so item number four is to be able to say, let's take it from lawyers' brains and put it into a corpus that a legal tech tool might be able to use. The odds of Manus and Google Deep Research and OpenAI's Deep Research having 2, 3, and 4 is quite slim. Maybe they'll have the contract, maybe they'll get the cases, but the things that we've just talked about, it's going to take them a while for them to be able to collect. We can maybe build products as legal tech companies while they're doing that.
Well, exactly. The data capture, right? All of this kind of like soft stuff that they currently don't have. But I'm going to raise a few interesting points here, and we may kind of talk about them, we may just kind of like mention them. The first is, you might have seen this video where two different AIs are talking to each other, and they both realize that they're AI, and they suddenly go, oh, if you're an AI, maybe we can make this more efficient. And they go, boop, 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 and then like it communicated and managed to have this really complex conversation that would have taken humans minutes in seconds. That's number one. I'll mention that. So there may be a future where these Google AI bots are super efficient at arguing for legal cases that just wipes humans' flaws. If that's a phrase. The second is this Anthropic research from a couple of weeks ago, which one of the findings was what the model tells you it's doing is not actually what's activated inside the neural network. And so the thinking models, even if we take the deep research, etc., and you read its chain of thought of like, here's kind of what I'm reasoning through, and it's fascinating to read through that sometimes. If you take what Anthropic has found and turn it back, is it actually following its own chain of thought, or is it just kind of telling us that because it thinks we want to read that? So I think kind of like neither of these points go to, are human lawyers going to be replaced? But they're just kind of interesting little segues to go, we don't really know where this is going to go. It's a big mystery.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And yeah, I did see that video with the bots talking to each other in an inscrutable language. And it's a bit terrifying because if it's inscrutable, we can't analyze it. So we can't really see what it's doing. And as AI takes up more and more of the work that we do, sometimes it's innocuous work, right? Just draft me a letter. But if we start being more agentic to say, go buy me something, or have my government bot interact with my private bot and be able to do things, then we're starting to get into awfulness territory. And if we can't actually see what the machines are doing, then that gets to the concerns of P-doom. And for those who don't know about P-doom, that's what's the probability of doom where AI just takes over the world and does bad things. So to that end, that the bots talking to each other in an inscrutable beeps and bloops made me think of a cartoon that I can't remember if we talked about on this podcast, but it's maybe the funniest and most profound cartoon I've read about AI, where the sender says, look, I took a bullet point and turned it into an email I pretend that I wrote. And the recipient said, look, I took an email, turned it into a bullet point I pretend I read. So it's funny and profound, where if it starts as a bullet point and if it ends as a bullet point, what's the point of the email in the middle? because there could be 1,000 versions of that email. There could be 1,000,000 versions of that email. What matters is the bullet point on the front end and the bullet point on the back end. And these are ideas. And by the way, in copyright law, ideas are uncopyrightable. So you can't copyright the bullet point ideas on both sides. And if a machine creates the expression of those ideas, the Copyright Office has said that an expression is similarly uncopyrightable. So you have uncopyrightable turtles all the way through. So now, when I told this to an engineer friend of mine, he said, why would the bullet points even be English? Why wouldn't I send you my vector embeddings and you receive it with your vector embeddings? I could be able to send it as Damien Riehl, and my client can receive it as their 5-year-old developmentally disabled self or their PhD in physics self. In vector embeddings, the concepts are the things that matter. The ideas are the things that matter. So we can send that as English bullet points, or we can send that as embeddings. So in the same way, the bloop, beep, bloop, bloop, bloop that the machines were doing were essentially sending their vector embeddings and doing a more efficient way to be able to communicate, which then goes to, for decades, maybe hundreds of years, we've said, is English really the best way to represent contracts? Is English really the best way to represent litigation documents? Or do we want to have a more formalized, structured way, maybe vector embeddings, to be able to represent what matters in a contract or what matters in litigation? So it's funny, but a bit profound that the beep blooping might be the future of law, maybe.
So I'm going to bring us back to this idea of human expectations. The recipients of these services, of all of these things that we're talking about, are humans, and they have certain societal, communal expectations that have to be met. It's the same reason we wear suits. Like, are we less intelligent when we turn up to a meeting without a suit on? No, but people expect us to wear a suit, and therefore we do. My wife is starting a new job tomorrow, and she spent the last 2 hours walking in and out of the bedroom going, do I look good in this? And the answer is always, yes, darling, you look fantastic in this. But there's 2 layers of societal expectations I just communicated. And the beeps and bloops, as effective and efficient as they are, may not be what we want.
Right. The whole idea of explainable AI, just like your wife wants to be able to explain, no, you look lovely in that outfit, right? She might say, well, what in particular makes me look lovely? And then you have to explain your opinion, right? In the same way, we want to be able to explain for the beeps and bloops, like, what was the reasoning process? Because if the reasoning process is that the machine is going to violate antitrust laws, we're probably going to want to interpret that beep and bloop to say, no, don't collude with the other agents who are competitors, right? So this interpretability and being able to read what the agents are doing is quite important. So yes, we need to do that. And you're also talking about, what we wear matters. It reminds me, I worked for a judge before I went to law school, and every day I would wear a suit and tie, because, I was 22 years old and I didn't know anything about anything. So if I wear a suit, that might make it look like I know something about something. Then one day I didn't wear a tie. I just wore a jacket with an open collar. And my judge said to me, Damien, do we not pay you enough? And I said, well, 1, Your Honor, no, you don't pay me enough. And 2, yes, I will wear a tie tomorrow. For those who interact with me, I'm wearing a coat right now, open collar, of course. But I wear that because I wore a suit for literally 20 years. I was wearing a suit every day. And I think that there is not only the perceived, that is people viewing you, perceive you as being more professional, but there's also, I tend to up my game if I'm wearing a suit. If I were wearing, as they say during the pandemic, soft pants, that is sweatpants or something else like that, I think I would have a lower game than I do wearing a suit. So anyway, so maybe that's just my idiosyncrasy. If you look sharp, you feel sharp, but we've gone far astray from large language models.
Have we? Because my next system prompt is going to tell the model, hey, you're wearing a suit while you're answering this question.
Yes, 100%. You're wearing a suit and people will die if you get this wrong.
Well, let's move back to what started this conversation in the first place, which is the giants moving into the space. Because we've known since the beginning Microsoft was going to move in, and they have moved in with Copilot. There was a survey that Oz prepares for skills, and one of the questions is, hey, what's your firm using for summarization? And the results was released publicly today. Nikki Shaver, the Legal Tech Hub, covered it. And surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, Copilot was used by more than 50% of the major law firms for summarization, along with VLEX and Cynthia and Harvey and everyone else. And then the question becomes like, okay, Microsoft's in this space. We can kind of see what their strategy is, right? They want to become the assistant to every lawyer. What's Amazon doing? What's Facebook doing? What's Netflix doing?
Yeah. If the means of production goes from humans to machines, all that's left is GPUs and energy. That is, whoever controls the GPUs and whoever has the energy has the means of production. Who has GPUs and energy? NVIDIA does. And they sell it to OpenAI and to Google and to Microsoft and Anthropic and Amazon and Meta and maybe a handful of other folks. So you will
Adobe
consolidate.
as well. Adobe's a player.
Yeah. That's right. So you'll consolidate the means of production to those who have GPUs that can pay for those GPUs and those that have energy to do these work. So if you think about that as kind of the future, and then going back to Freshfields, choosing to partner with Google Cloud, I wonder if this is a play of, and I'm not going to speak about Freshfields in particular, but just large law firms generally, and the whole category of big law. I wonder if they've been burned with having a duopoly for so many years with legal service for legal providers, and say, maybe I want to be able to essentially hedge my bets and not have to be able to be locked into one ecosystem for that means of production. That is for the GPUs and the energy. Because I don't know if you noticed this, but Freshfields said that, yes, they were partnering with Google Cloud, and they're also keeping Microsoft Azure, or Azure, if you prefer. So they're doing both, Google and Microsoft. So if the means of production is favored toward Google, they'll be good. If it's favored toward Microsoft, they'll also be fine. So I wonder if this is a way to hedge bets, to be able to say whichever horse ends up with more GPUs and energy, we'll go with that horse.
I think it's an interesting observation, right? Like you're reducing it down to means of production, GPUs, energy. But I think there's a gap between GPU and energy being applied to solving a problem and actually solving that problem. And I think this is a gap where the smaller players, the more nimble players, have a role to play. And I divide the market into 3 stratums, if you like. There's the big giants, and I'm making assumptions here, the Microsoft of the world. They're not going to tailor their solutions for legal. It'll get close enough that with the right prompting, it can solve legal problems, but it's not legal tailored. There are law firms who will write their internal prompts, codify their expertise, and use no-code, low-code stuff to solve very specific stuff for them. And then there's that middle stratum of the legal tech providers, the vertical specific guys, who are going to provide the stuff that gets very close to bridging that last mile. And in this universe, with that construct, I think the Freshfields of the world saying, we are going to use Google and Azure, are they picking the option to say, this is good enough? We don't need anyone to close that last mile for us because we ourselves are going to prompt and close that last mile. Like, is that the strategy with this type of purchase decision?
I think maybe. And, certainly my experience, and I wonder if it's yours too, is that we at VLEX use an ensemble of models. And the prompts to go from Model 1 to Model 2 to Model 5 to Model 10, the prompts really, you don't get much improved precision or recall with changing the prompts from Model 1 to Model 2. The different models will often respond to the same prompts in similar ways. So if that is true, then I, as any law firm, could be able to take all of my expertise of prompting and be able to say, okay, I could be able to prompt with Google Cloud and be able to get a good response. And if I want to jump ship and do the same type of thing in Azure, I would probably be just as performant as it with Google. So really being able to take the knowledge from lawyers' brains and from legal professionals' brains and put it into a tangible form, an artifact, like a prompt. Then once I do that, then I could be almost agnostic as to platform, whether it's Google or Microsoft, and I can move from one platform to the other. So I wonder if this is a reflection of that.
Maybe, but that's kind of like they're choosing between a base layer, right? Like, are they saying, regardless of whether we use Google or Azure or Amazon or whoever, we don't need anyone to close that last mile for us?
I think that's right.
I'm shrugging.
Yeah. What is the last mile? And ultimately, you mentioned it earlier, is the humanity. That is the true last mile is me looking you in the eye and saying, I don't think you want to do this. Based on these closed-door meetings that we've had, I've seen this go south a lot of times. I've seen this go south with regulators. I've seen this go south with opposing counsel. I've seen this go south with the courts. You probably don't want to do this. And so looking somebody in the eye is the true last mile. And then the real question is now, okay, Microsoft and Google, close to that last mile, how far do we need to go? And I think that's the literally $1 trillion question.
It's going to be fun. So among the players who are moving in this space. Oh, by the way, before I move on to talk about other players in this space, you reminded me of a LinkedIn post that I saw the other day from Danielle Benecki. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, from Baker McKenzie, and she posted that they've done internal testing of, do the legal vertical specific models give that much more than just plain vanilla out of the box GPT. And now I think she didn't apply any special data to this. This is just kind of like chatting to it. And I think the conclusion is not that much more.
You can imagine if you're Google putting, several $100 billion worth of training into it, you can imagine that what's a legal vendor going to do to compete with that? And as to compete with OpenAI, that's, and Microsoft, that's opening up 3 Mile Island to get enough energy to be able to do their next training run. The real question is, can you beat OpenAI's GPT 4.5, or can you beat the new O3 or O4 model that's going to come out? And the answer is probably not. But the question is, are there particular tiny use cases where you don't need that massive model? Clem, you might know, KL3M, yes, is a foundational model built by Mike Bomarito and Dan Katz for 273 Ventures. And they've donated that to Alia, the nonprofit 501c3 that Joe Green and I are on the board of directors for. They've spent a lot of money spinning up GPUs and training on cases, statutes, regulations, the entire .gov website. And so they've created that, and not created really a large language model, even though it's about 1 trillion tokens, which is a lot of tokens, but kind of a medium language model. But all that medium language model knows is the law. And so you can imagine, if you want a chatbot, go to GPT 4.5, right? And that language is going to be amazing, or Claude's language is going to be amazing for a chatbot. So that option number one is a generalist large language model. Clem's not going to be able to compete with it. But option number two is to say, what if I want to classify this agreement type? How much better is Clem going to be with all of this data that's focused only on the law than GPT 4.5? And I think that's an open question. So for that particular vertical, that particular use case, maybe a small language model or a medium language model that's trained on the law for a particular task might be more productive than the large language model, and less GPUs.
Absolutely.
And less energy.
And it's less energy, less GPUs. It's all about the use case. To Danielle's point, it depends on the use case. So I think there's a few interesting moves that are going to be happening in the legal space. One is going to be Adobe. I don't know if you noticed, but Adobe is making a move for document review. And it's almost as if they're framing their solution to provide due diligence in the same way that Kira and Luminance have been doing. What are your thoughts on Adobe moving into legal?
One of the reasons that legal tech in general has had such an influx of private equity and venture capital money is because we societally have kind of wrung the efficiencies out of every other area of business except for law. We, for 25 years, have been, really wringing all that efficiency out. So if you're in Adobe, where do you go next? You're like, oh, wait, here's an inefficient market that maybe I could be able to spend $1 and get back 10 or 20 or 50, right? So I think that eye of Sauron of all the venture capitalists and private equity is kind of also going to say the Adobes of the world and the Googles of the world and the Microsofts of the world might turn that eye of Sauron into legal tech to be able to wring the efficiency out of legal like they did in the other areas. So that's kind of macro. Micro, as far as being able to do, a little dipping their toes into it, of course, much like DocuSign dipped their toes into solving a problem for legal that people don't see as a legal problem. People just see that as a problem. I need to get a thing signed. It happens to be that the thing I need signed is a contract, so it happens to be legal. So DocuSign kind of rolled over a lot of legal tech solutions accidentally, just by solving a regular problem. Much like ChatGPT kind of rolls over legal advice. That is, if I'm a consumer and I say, I want to be able to create a contract between me and the other side, here's all of my things, draft me a contract, ChatGPT will happily do that. So will Anthropic, so will Google, so will everybody will do these things. Is that the unauthorized practice of law? Probably. Does Google care? No. Does OpenAI care? No. They're not staying up late nights thinking, oh my gosh, am I violating the unauthorized practice of law statute? And so if that's true, the unauthorized practice of law statutes, if they're truly meant to protect the hoi polloi from the evil non-lawyers doing them harm, we should definitely sue OpenAI. And we should definitely sue Microsoft. We should definitely sue Google. We should definitely sue Meta. We should definitely sue Amazon, because who's committing more harm than all of those big tech companies for all the hundreds of thousands or millions of legal questions being pushed through them all the time? So if we are really trying to protect the hoi polloi, we should definitely sue them. If we're not going to sue these mass UPL violators, what does that mean about the purpose of UPL? Are we really trying to protect the hoi polloi, or does the emperor really have no clothes? Maybe is there an alternative motive where lawyers are trying to protect their turf? The next point then is, okay, if we're not going to sue Microsoft and Google and OpenAI for the unauthorized practice of law, if you try to sue a small legal tech company for the same kind of thing, if I represented the small tech company, I would implead Microsoft. I would implead Google. I would implead Anthropic because I'm using them as a tool. So they're going to be part of this one way or the other. And so the real question is, if impleaded, will Microsoft use the same arguments as Upsolve made in the Second Circuit, saying that legal speech is free speech, and the unauthorized practice of law violates the First Amendment as free speech? And that is an argument that won in the Southern District of New York. That is, the Southern District of New York said, yes, UPL violates the First Amendment. A North Carolina case similarly said at the district court level that it violates the First Amendment. So both of those are currently being appealed. So I would say that to this idea of Adobe, are they committing legal advice or are they providing legal work? Is Microsoft doing that? Is OpenAI? I think they're going to roll over legal, not on purpose, but accidentally. Much like
it's completely incidental.
Right. So just like an elephant accidentally steps on an ant, right? I talked to a massive legal tech company whose name you know that I'm not going to say. And one of the employees said, if Google wanted to smash us, they absolutely could, but legal is too small a market for Google. Google thinks in the terms of, hundreds of billions, and legal is, much smaller than that. So they don't even care for legal as a vertical.
Yeah, well, unless they're not thinking about legal as it is today, but legal as it could be if all justice problems and the gap is bridged. So maybe that's what they're thinking.
Maybe. If I'm a consumer and Google is hearing, hundreds of thousands or millions of consumer questions about legal work, maybe they just say, okay, go ahead and loosen up the guardrails. Today I say, I'm not a lawyer, this isn't legal advice, but here's the answer. Maybe they could answer even more things and essentially give the consumers what they want. And what the consumers want is legal information. Does this statute let me do this or the other thing? Does this regulation allow me to do this, that, or the other thing? That is legal information, not legal advice. I think that they will be able to hang their hat on providing legal information. Maybe related to what we're talking about, I've been thinking a lot about if I'm a small mom and pop legal tech company that's trying to feed legal information to my consumer, that is consumers of legal services. If the consumer asks me, is marijuana possession legal in my state? Is that legal information or is that legal advice? Is marijuana legal? That's just legal information, right? That's a statute saying marijuana is legal or marijuana is legal under these circumstances. So question number one, is it legal? That's probably legal information. Number two, can I possess legal information? Now that's a little trickier, right? Now I'm applying my facts to the law, right? Now, can he possess marijuana? Now I'm doing for a third party. That's maybe a little trickier. Number four, should I possess marijuana? Now you're getting pretty clearly into advice, right? This is should I is number four. That's definitely so. But what if a legal tech vendor took questions 4, 3, and 2 and converted them into number 1? Say, I know you asked whether you should possess marijuana. I'm not going to answer that. But what I am going to tell you is number 1, is marijuana legal in your state? Here's a whole bunch of legal information that is not legal advice. So you can imagine if a lot of companies are doing this right now, and they're practicing in all 50 states. And what bar regulator is going to come after that company for such things?
It's getting fuzzier. I mean, as you kind of look at exactly the analysis you just gave, every tech company is touching on some layer of this, and then the lawyers are the ones who are giving the advice right now. But it's not you don't need a big stretch of imagination to go direct. So. Yeah, look, and your question about UPL is phenomenal. It's a big question.
It is a big question. Bridget from the American Arbitration Association, AAA, Bridget McCormick is the CEO and really brilliant. She and Jen Leonard, if you don't listen to their podcast, if you like us, you should also listen to 2030 Vision, which is their podcast. Really good. Bridget talks a lot about law being the operating system of society. Society's operating system is the law. It's the way that we have the rule of law to say that we can actually contract with each other and we can actually, act in a way that is harmonious with our societal views. And so if we think of it in that way, that law is the operating system of society, then maybe lawyers shouldn't have a monopoly on interpreting the law. That is, maybe Google and others societally might be better off helping that consumer in a way that we've not helped consumers as lawyers. That is, 92% of legal needs are unmet because we lawyers are too expensive. And so Google might be able to serve that 92% in a way that's better for society, but might actually be, I was going to say harms lawyers, but it doesn't harm lawyers because the 92%
we're not servicing them anyway.
We're not servicing them anyway, so we don't lose any money. So essentially what Google is doing is serving that latent market that we are unwilling to serve. And so maybe as a society, maybe that's probably better for society. And the question for all the lawyers on this call and all the legal tech vendors is how can we take our legal services and shrink the cost of them to be able to eat that 92% in a way that Google cannot, and the way that Microsoft cannot, and the way that OpenAI cannot, and that Anthropic cannot. That is the stuff in your brain. How do we serve that consumer better than those big tech? And I think that's the biggest, literally $1 trillion question.
I think there's a fear among a lot of the legal tech vendors, well, not just legal tech vendors, but among lawyers themselves, which is if I lower the price of my service or of my product so that everybody can afford it, I'm not making as much money as I can from the people that I used to sell to. How do you address that concern?
The answer to that is Jevons paradox. And for those listeners who don't know what Jevons paradox is, Jevons paradox is the reason we thought LED light bulbs would save us a lot of energy, but they're so cheap, we leave them on all the time. Jevons paradox is if you make the item more efficient, society will use more of it. If we put more lanes in the highways, you'll build more houses, which will then still clog up those highways, right? So with the LED example, LEDs are too cheap to measure. That is, I leave them on all the time. So what if legal work were too cheap to measure? What if I say, gosh, I as a consumer, every time I call my lawyer, it's $1,000. But if that $1,000 shrinks down to $100, I'm going to call that lawyer every day. And I might call more than 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 times. And in the aggregate, I will have spent more money because of Jevons paradox. And so for your lawyer straw man that you just had, I as a lawyer, how do I get that cost down? You could say, well, at Vincent, for example, we take a 200-hour task of analyzing a complaint and shrink it down to 5 minutes. And then you could maybe spend, another 15 minutes or 20 minutes doing that analysis and getting it out the door. If you take 200 hours and shrink it down to a half hour, that is now shrinking my cost. So I can bill the equivalent in a flat fee of, say, maybe an hour for that half hour's worth of work. Now the client's paying a hell of a lot less, and I'm giving a better work product to that client for less cost. So the answer is flat fees and Jevons paradox. If you do flat fees, you shrink your cost and increase your profit margin and ride the wave of exponential growth that OpenAI and Google and Microsoft are giving us to be able to give the benefit where you get more money as a lawyer and the client actually gets their legal services.
This feels like one of those university exams where people go, assume the perfect economic situation, right? Assume there's no friction. Assume that human hours can scale infinitely, etc. I don't know if that, again, it comes back to, I can see that's a possible outcome, but the path to get there is, I think, somewhat less certain.
I think that's right. And yeah, economists talk about the economically rational actor, which is a fiction. No actor is truly economically rational, but it's a fiction that economists have to say, well, we have to assume that the actor is rational. And so the real question is, do we assume that the lawyers are rational in seeing what I've just said as being true? That if you shrink the cost and increase your profit margin, you could actually make more money in a flat fee world than you ever did in an hourly billing world. If we were truly rational actors, we would take flat fee as obviously this is the way of the future. Obviously, AI is going to push down these costs. The question, we can argue about timeline, right? Is it going to happen tomorrow? No way. Is it going to happen 20 years from now? Of course. So now we're just arguing about timeline. How soon is that going to be the case? But an economically rational lawyer would say, of course it's going to happen. So I should do it sooner rather than later, economically rationally. So that's option one. Option two for the economically rational actor is saying, I'm a millionaire doing it the way that I've been doing it for dozens of years. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm going to be able to reap these rents. And, as harmful as society as they are, I'm going to reap these rents until I have to change. And then I'll go to your option one. Thank you very much. Both of these are economically rational actors. Option one, let's do it faster and eat everybody else's lunch. And option two, I'm not going to do it until I have to. Both of them are economically rational.
Yeah, and I guess right now the people who resist change are probably winning, at least in terms of numbers.
Maybe winning in their brains, right? But I talk to Fortune 100 and Fortune 50 companies all the time that say every time I think about calling a lawyer, I use Vincent and I get the answer and I give it to my business person. And the business person says, "Oh, this is great," and they say that lawyer doesn't know why the phone stopped ringing. And so really in that lawyer's brain, they're killing it. They're doing great. But these Fortune 100 companies aren't hiring them anymore. Or they're going to a competitor and the companies don't want to tell a lawyer why they stopped hiring them. They just don't hire them anymore. The phone stops ringing. And so I would say that, between option one lawyer, where they want to be able to eat their competitor's lunch, and option two lawyer saying, I'm killing it the way I am. I'm doing great. That option two lawyer doesn't know why the phone stopped ringing. And option one is probably eating their lunch without them knowing it.
If the giants do move, if the giants do come into the legal vertical, what's our advice for law firms? What's our advice for incumbents? What's our advice for startups?
I would say firms, take as much from your lawyer's brains and make it into an artifact. Whether that's a knowledge management artifact, whether it's a Word document, whether it's a prompt. Right? And taking it from the implicit knowledge that's stuck in our brains to the explicit artifact is the most important thing that law firms can do right now. And we talked during our Central Park meeting about what's the most effective and efficient way to be able to turn it from brains into artifacts. Yes. And maybe that's audio recordings, right? Essentially take your phone and be able to record it and then transcribe that recording and be able to say, okay, what are nuggets that I can put into my knowledge graph and in my knowledge management artifact in a way that makes sense. So number one, firms get that implicit knowledge and make it explicit. That's the biggest thing firms can do. Incumbents, I would say that you probably need to disrupt yourself in the way that Blockbuster did not, and the way that Kodak did not. They were doing great until they weren't. There's a Hemingway quote that bankruptcy happens gradually and then all of a sudden. So for the incumbents, disrupt yourself. Otherwise, it's going to happen gradually and all of a sudden. For startups, I would say, what is a way that you can enable firms to make the implicit explicit? And what is a way that you will take advantage of the incumbents probably dealing with the innovator's dilemma and not actually disrupting themselves as the way that they should? So I would say that's probably for all the startups, is helping the firms and outmaneuvering and outpacing the incumbents. What do you think? What do you think firms, incumbents, and startups should be doing?
I'm going to answer that in reverse. So for startups first, the assumption I'm going to have is every man and his dog is going to start using generative AI if they have not already. And so any capabilities that startups are building, which is a thin wrapper on Gen AI, don't do it. Like, people can solve that. Instead, think about what you can build that goes beyond the thin wrapper. Think about, if language models become as capable as humans, what would they need in order to enable their work? And I like to use the example of a calculator. Like, you and I, we can sit down and longhand solve really long arithmetic equations and so on, but we're not going to do it. We're going to punch it into a calculator. Build calculators is I think what I would like to tell startups, because they're not going to be replaced. You just build a better calculator and people will use you, even if language models become cleverer and smarter than humans. For incumbents, I agree. Disrupt yourself and really work out what it is that you as the incumbent is really, really good at. I have no authority or credibility in telling a large incumbent what to do. All I can say is, if you don't change, people like me, we're going to come and eat your breakfast. So stop me or try. and so disrupt yourself. And for the customers, the law firms, the consumers, the lawyers, I think it's working out what it is that you need in order to provide legal services, solve the problems or identify the problems you have. So I'm kind of less in the capture your knowledge into artifacts camp. I'm more about, do you even need to capture it? Figure that out first. And I think if you do, then even if the giants move into the space, you know exactly how you can make use of the giants.
Yeah, that all sounds right. The other aspect that when you're talking made me realize that we've been talking about incumbents, and implicit in incumbents is incumbent legal tech But there's also incumbent law firms. So you can imagine big law. Peter Chen from OpenAI, he was the product manager for ChatGPT. Peter Chen said, as we move into our agentic futures, the number of 10,000 person businesses is going to shrink. Because in an agent world, what's to keep 5 of those people from jumping ship and starting their own company and having their 10,000 agents underneath them doing the work of the 10,000 employees? So we're going to have fewer 10,000 person companies and more 5 to 10 person companies competing with them and doing better than them. Now take what I just said and replace company with law firm. So if you are a massive law firm with 10,000 lawyers, what's to keep maybe 5 of those breaking off, creating a boutique, and then being able to have their 10,000 associates underneath them to be able to do the work of paralegals and others at a lower price point? I think big law has to be able to think about that incumbents too. You have to compete with the people that will jump ship, the partners that will jump ship come December 31st when they get their draw, then move on to maybe make a boutique.
But I'm going to add one specific example to the law firm idea, and then I think we're almost at time. And that is, I was having a conversation with a VC. I won't name the VC, but I'll name the company we're talking about, which was Harvey. We were talking about how Harvey, having grown so quickly and having such an enormous valuation, it's going to be really hard for them to meet that valuation using just software sales. Especially because there's this idea that SaaS is dying, which I think we'll save for another conversation because I don't think SaaS is dying. But how are they going to meet a $3 billion valuation? What sort of multiples is that? How much do they have to sell in subscription every single year? And is the market even that big? What's the total addressable market? And then we had this kind of revelation of, well, hang on. There is one very clear scenario where they'll be worth that much money. And that is if every single person who jumped into Harvey from a law firm, who's become their go-to-market person and not acting as a lawyer anymore, go back to being a lawyer and start billing out. And then Harvey's worth $3 billion and maybe more.
That is quite funny. And I guess there's a joke that's not a joke, that if you work for a law firm and the associate jumps ship from that law firm to go work for the in-house counsel, that's actually a win. Because now this is a buyer of your legal services going forward. You now have a friend as an in-house counsel. I wonder if that's the same thing with Harvey. So and I won't right in reverse. And I won't talk about Harvey. I'll just talk about generic big legal tech. If you hire a bunch of lawyers that then work for you a while and then jump ship and say to their new law firms that they've jumped ship to, let's use this big legal tech vendor because it's really, really good. I used to work there. So maybe that has the valuation.
Maybe. I mean, that's a great strategy, isn't it? So I think with that, we're almost at time, and we've talked about pretty much every giant that we think are likely going to come into the space. So Damien, I'm going to ask you your usual question, which is, what's got you optimistic this week?
This week was a really good week for optimism because I spent Monday at Boston's Suffolk Law, where David Colarusso, Quentin Steenhouse, and Sam Glover are doing really amazing things to be able to help access to justice. And they convened some of the smartest people, including Bob Ambrogi, Satish Nuri, and a bunch of others, people from the Free Law Project, people from AAA, Maya Markovich. All these people were thinking about how access to justice would really be flourishing under the age of large language models. So it was a very soul-nourishing time in Boston on Monday, which led to me jumping on a plane on Monday night and arriving at midnight in Silicon Valley, where I spent Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday too, at Stanford, where Stanford had its Codex Future Law. And some of the smartest people in the world on legal tech were convening and thinking about how large language models are going to transform our profession. So I am incredibly optimistic based on Boston at Suffolk on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at Stanford, thinking about what it is, but what could be. I think the theater of the possible is quite strong, and being able to talk to people who are building the future is quite uplifting.
Well, with that, Damien, what a wonderful way to start season 2.
It was great fun, Horace, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. Thanks to our listeners for listening. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you again.